The holographic display flickered to life, casting a blue-green glow across the bridge of the mercenary flagship, Starbreaker. Commander Elena Rodriguez leaned forward, her augmented eyes scanning the planetary data with practiced precision. New Horizon appeared as nothing more than a pale blue dot surrounded by sparse orbital infrastructure, a frontier world that looked more like a half-finished experiment than a serious settlement. "Preliminary assessment complete," announced her eye assistant, its monotone voice cutting through the ambient hum of the ship's advanced systems. "Colonial population, approximately 12,500. Primary infrastructure, agricultural and mineral extraction. Defensive capabilities, minimal." Elena's lips curled into a slight smirk. She had heard these assessments before. Dozens of colonies had fallen beneath the Obsidian Syndicate's might, their resistance crushed within hours of first contact. New Horizon would be no different. Just another contract, just another payday. The contract itself was straightforward, almost mundane. A minor stellar consortium had pooled resources to eliminate the human presence on New Horizon. Their motivations were typical of frontier politics: territorial disputes, resource competition, the endless dance of galactic economics. The Obsidian Syndicate didn't care about reasons. They cared about credits, and this contract promised a substantial payout. "Marcus," Elena called to her second-in-command, "run a comprehensive threat analysis. I want every potential variable mapped." Lieutenant Marcus Chen approached, his biomechanical exosuit humming with embedded quantum processors. Unlike the clunky military gear of less advanced forces, the Syndicate's equipment represented the pinnacle of mercenary technology. Adaptive nanoweave armor, integrated weapon systems, neural interface combat protocols. They were walking arsenals. "Threat level is categorically low," Marcus reported, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "Colonial Defense Force appears to be primarily composed of mining security personnel and local militia. Their weapon systems are antiquated, primarily repurposed mining and agricultural equipment. No evidence of advanced defensive technologies." The bridge crew listened with a mixture of boredom and professional detachment. To them, this was routine. Another day, another conquest. Elena's personal history made her slightly more cautious. She had seen seemingly weak targets transform into unexpected nightmares. Early in her career, a supposedly primitive mining colony had nearly decimated her first combat unit through a series of ingenious adaptive strategies. That experience had taught her to never fully underestimate a human settlement. "Prepare preliminary invasion protocols," she commanded. "Standard pacification package. Minimal force, maximum psychological impact. We want them to understand the futility of resistance before the first shot is fired." The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity. Holographic targeting systems began mapping potential landing zones. Tactical algorithms calculated optimal approach vectors. Weapon systems charged, their energy signatures a subtle reminder of the overwhelming force about to be unleashed. Marcus pulled up a detailed topographical scan of New Horizon. The planet was a harsh environment. Rocky terrain, intermittent atmosphere, extreme temperature variations. Typical frontier conditions that would challenge most colonization efforts. Yet somehow, humans had managed to establish a foothold. Estimated time to planetary insertion, Marcus reported, approximately 47 standard hours. Syndicate Command has approved full operational autonomy. Elena nodded, her augmented eyes reflecting the swirling holographic displays. Full autonomy meant they could adapt strategies on the ground without seeking constant approval. It was both a privilege and a significant responsibility. Little did they know that New Horizon was anything but the helpless target their preliminary scan suggested. Beneath the seemingly primitive exterior, something extraordinary was waiting. A colony that would challenge everything the Obsidian Syndicate believed about warfare, adaptation, and human potential. The invasion was coming, and nothing could prepare them for what awaited. The drop pods screamed through New Horizon's upper atmosphere, their stealth coating rendering them nearly invisible to conventional detection systems. Inside each pod, mercenary warriors ran final system checks, their biomechanical exosuits pulsing with suppressed energy. Commander Elena Rodriguez monitored the descent from her command shuttle, watching as tactical overlays mapped potential landing zones. Atmospheric entry nominal, Marcus reported, his voice calm and clinical. No significant resistance detected. Preliminary scans show minimal electronic signatures near proposed landing sites. Elena knew those scans were deceptive. Her years of experience had taught her that appearances could be dangerously misleading. The colony's apparent weakness suggested something was being hidden. The first pod touched down with a controlled burst of anti-gravity stabilizers. Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez was first to emerge, his quantum-enhanced optics sweeping the rocky terrain. Jagged rock formations and sparse vegetation created a landscape that looked more like a battlefield than a colonized world. Dust kicked up by the pod's landing swirled around weaponized exosuits that looked more like walking arsenals than human forms. Perimeter secure, Ramirez reported. No immediate hostiles. Detecting minimal electronic signatures. Something felt wrong. The silence was too perfect, the landscape too undisturbed. A warning flashed across Ramirez's heads-up display, a momentary electronic ghost that disappeared almost instantly. He zoomed his optical sensors, catching a fleeting glimpse of something moving between rock formations. Not a living being. Not quite a machine. "Command, I'm detecting anomalous movement," he transmitted, his voice tight with professional tension. Before Elena could respond, the first wave of defenders revealed themselves. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They moved with a fluidity that defied conventional military training. Part coordinated assault, part adaptive swarm. Mining drones, clearly repurposed from their original industrial design, transformed with impossible speed. Cutting lasers became precision weapons. Excavation equipment morphed into defensive platforms. What had looked like abandoned machinery suddenly became a living, breathing defensive network. Tactical recalibration needed. Marcus shouted, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. They're not following any standard defensive protocols. The colony's response was nothing short of revolutionary. Where a traditional military would have established fixed defensive positions, these defenders created a dynamic battlefield that shifted and changed with terrifying speed. A mining laser would fire, then immediately reposition. Defensive barriers would materialize from equipment that moments before looked completely harmless. Ramirez's squad found themselves under attack from directions that defied military logic. An agricultural drone would launch a precision strike, then disappear into a network of similar machines. Communication systems seemed to move and adapt, creating a distributed intelligence that made traditional electronic warfare tactics obsolete. They're turning their limitations into advantages, Elena muttered, watching the tactical display with growing intensity. Each mercenary attack was met with a response that was simultaneously improvised and precise. A secondary attack came from an unexpected direction. The very terrain of New Horizons seemed to work against the invaders. Rock formations that appeared static suddenly revealed hidden communication nodes. What looked like simple mining equipment transformed into sophisticated defensive platforms. Lieutenant Sandra Kim, leading the second landing team, found her squad surrounded by a defense mechanism that seemed to think and adapt in real time. "They're not defending," she reported, a hint of professional admiration in her voice. "They're evolving." The Obsidian Syndicate's carefully planned invasion was unraveling within minutes of landing. Everything they knew about warfare, about invasion tactics, was being systematically dismantled by a colony that refused to play by any established rules. Commander Rodriguez watched the tactical display with a mixture of professional concern and growing respect. This was no ordinary resistance. This was something entirely new. The first contact was supposed to be a simple pacification operation. Instead, it was becoming a lesson in the unexpected nature of human adaptation. And the real battle had only just begun. The colony's command center looked nothing like a traditional military installation. Housed in what appeared to be a converted agricultural research facility, it pulsed with a different kind of energy. Dr. Rachel Matthews stood at the center of a dynamic operations hub, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe and shift with living intelligence. "They're trying to apply standard invasion protocols," she muttered to her team of engineers and tactical specialists. "Which means we need to be anything but standard." The mercenary invasion had triggered a response that went far beyond simple defense. New Horizons colonists were rewriting the very concept of warfare in real time. In the main research bay, a team of engineers worked with frantic precision. Mining lasers lay dismantled, their components being rapidly repurposed. Agricultural drones hung from suspended racks, their agricultural programming being overwritten with combat algorithms. What looked like chaos was actually a highly organized system of technological adaptation. "Communication network is now fully distributed," announced Michael Rodriguez, the colony's chief of communications. His system was unlike anything in standard military doctrine. Instead of a centralized command structure, the colony's defensive network operated more like a neural network, each piece of equipment, each colonist, functioning as a potential node of resistance. Outside, the landscape itself became a weapon. The mercenaries found their advanced sensor systems confused by strategic electromagnetic interference. What appeared to be rock formations were actually sophisticated communication relays. Mining equipment transformed with impossible speed, becoming defensive platforms that could reposition and reconfigure faster than any track targeting system could follow. Lieutenant Alina Rodriguez of the Obsidian Syndicate watched in growing frustration. Her tactical displays showed impossible movements, defensive positions that shouldn't exist, weapon systems that defied conventional understanding. "They're not fighting," Marcus observed, his voice a mixture of professional analysis and genuine surprise. "They're problem-solving in real time." A mining laser would fire, then immediately reconfigure. An agricultural drone would launch a precision strike, then blend back into a network of seemingly identical machines. The colonists weren't just defending, they were transforming the entire concept of resistance. In the research facility, Dr. Matthews explained the strategy to her team. "We're not trying to match their technology," she said, pointing to a holographic display of the ongoing conflict. "We're using our limitations as our greatest strength." A perfect example unfolded on the battlefield. A mercenary attack squad found their most advanced electronic warfare systems suddenly neutralized by a network of reprogrammed communication satellites. What should have been a devastating assault became a confused retreat. The colony's defensive strategy defied military logic. Where a traditional force would establish fixed defensive positions, New Horizon created a fluid, adaptive battlefield. Communication systems moved and changed. Defensive platforms appeared and disappeared with impossible speed. Marcus Chen analyzed the tactical data with growing concern. "They're turning every piece of equipment into a potential weapon," he reported to Commander Rodriguez. "Agricultural drones, mining lasers, communication networks. Nothing is what it seems." The mercenaries found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't follow any established rules of engagement. An enemy that saw limitations not as weaknesses, but as opportunities for innovation. A communication specialist in the mercenary command shuttle intercepted a transmission that sent chills down her spine. It wasn't a military communication. It sounded more like a collaborative problem-solving session, with multiple voices contributing to a rapidly evolving strategy. As the day progressed, it became clear that this was more than a battle. This was a fundamental reimagining of conflict itself. The Obsidian Syndicate had come to conquer. Instead, they were being taught a lesson in human potential. And the lesson was just beginning. The silence was the first weapon. Commander Alina Rodriguez felt it before she understood it. The mercenary communication networks began to fracture in ways that defied conventional electronic warfare. What started as subtle interference became a comprehensive assault on perception itself. In the advanced command shuttle, Lieutenant Marcus Chen struggled to maintain coherent tactical displays. Holographic interfaces flickered and warped, showing impossible battlefield configurations. One moment, a defensive position would appear impenetrable. The next, it would dissolve into a network of phantom signals and misdirected targeting systems. Sound manipulation incoming, warned the shuttle's defensive AI, its synthetic voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Low-frequency vibrations began to penetrate the mercenary exosuits, not loud enough to cause physical damage, but precisely calibrated to trigger deep-seated psychological responses. Stress hormones spiked. Perception became unreliable. The colonists had turned psychological warfare into a precise scientific instrument. Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez experienced the first wave of disorientation. His quantum-enhanced optics began displaying conflicting information. Rock formations seemed to shift. Defensive positions appeared and disappeared in impossible patterns. What looked like enemy combatants would resolve into nothing more than carefully positioned sensor reflectors. Dr. Rachel Matthews stood in the colony's central command center, orchestrating a symphony of psychological disruption. "It's not about defeating them," she explained to her team. "It's about making them defeat themselves." Holographic projections created entire battlefield scenarios that existed only in the mercenaries' perception. Communication channels were subtly manipulated, introducing just enough confusion to break down unit cohesion. The Obsidian Syndicate's supposedly unbreakable neural interfaces became conduits of calculated psychological stress. "We're targeting their perception of reality," Michael Rodriguez explained, his fingers dancing across advanced communication interfaces, not their physical capabilities. The mercenaries found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't exist in any traditional sense. Defensive positions that should have been vulnerable became impregnable through pure psychological manipulation. An agricultural drone would launch a strike, then seemingly vanish, leaving behind only a carefully constructed illusion of threat. Sandra Kim, leading a secondary assault team, watched in growing horror as her squad's tactical networks became increasingly unreliable. Communication became a minefield of potential misinformation. Every tactical decision felt like walking through a psychological trap. "They're not just defending," she reported back to command, her voice tight with professional tension. "They're systematically dismantling our ability to perceive the battlefield." The colony had transformed psychological warfare into a precise scientific instrument. Frequency-specific sound waves created subtle perceptual distortions. Holographic projections introduced just enough uncertainty to break down unit cohesion. The mercenaries' most advanced neural interfaces became conduits of calculated psychological stress. Commander Rodriguez realized they were facing something entirely unprecedented. This wasn't traditional warfare. This was a comprehensive assault on perception itself. Quantum-encrypted communication channels became unreliable. Tactical displays showed impossible battlefield configurations. What should have been a straightforward invasion was transforming into a nightmare of psychological manipulation. The colonists had discovered something fundamental. In the right hands, perception could be a more powerful weapon than any plasma cannon or quantum disruptor. As the day progressed, the Obsidian Syndicate found themselves fighting an enemy that existed more in the realm of psychology than physical space. Their most advanced technological systems were being turned against them, transformed into conduits of calculated uncertainty. The real battle was happening inside their minds, and they were losing. The first signs of the impending disaster came as a series of impossible calculations. Dr. Rachel Matthews stood in the colony's central engineering bay, surrounded by a network of repurposed equipment that defied conventional understanding. Mining lasers, communication satellites, agricultural drones. Each piece of technology was being transformed into something far beyond its original design. "Orbital positioning sequence initiated," announced Michael Rodriguez, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "Satellite network is fully synchronized." Aboard the Obsidian Syndicate flagship, Commander Elena Rodriguez watched her tactical displays with growing concern. The mercenary fleet's most advanced scanning systems began to show anomalies that shouldn't exist. phantom signal patterns, impossible gravitational calculations, communication networks that seemed to fold back on themselves in ways that defied known physics. Lieutenant Marcus Chen struggled to make sense of the incoming data. "We're detecting multiple potential weapon signatures," he reported, "but none of them match any known technological profile." The colonists had done the impossible. They were turning the very infrastructure of New Horizon into a comprehensive weapons system. Orbital communication satellites, originally designed for agricultural and research purposes, began to move with a precision that suggested something beyond simple programming. They weren't just communication devices anymore. They were becoming a distributed weapons system that could reconfigure in milliseconds. "Gravitational manipulation sequence beginning," Michael announced, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what was happening. The first mercenary ships began to experience inexplicable system failures. Advanced quantum shields flickered. Propulsion systems experienced micro-interruptions that shouldn't have been possible. What looked like a standard defensive maneuver was becoming a comprehensive technological assault. Dr. Matthews explained the strategy to her team. "We're not trying to match their technological superiority," she said, pointing to a holographic display of the orbital battle space. "We're using our limitations as our greatest strength." A mining laser, originally designed to cut through solid rock, became a precision orbital weapon. An agricultural drone network transformed into a distributed sensor array that could track and predict mercenary movements with impossible accuracy. Communication satellites became platforms for targeted electromagnetic disruption. The Obsidian Syndicate had come with the most advanced weapon systems in the known galaxy. The colonists were turning everyday equipment into something far more dangerous. "Weapon system is non-standard," Marcus reported, his voice betraying a mixture of professional analysis and genuine confusion. "I can't classify the attack vector." Entire mercenary squadrons found their most advanced electronic systems compromised. Weapon targeting became unreliable. Communication networks dissolved into cascading interference patterns. What should have been a straightforward invasion was transforming into a technological nightmare. Commander Rodriguez watched in growing horror as her tactical displays showed systematic destruction of her fleet's capabilities. These weren't traditional attacks. These were comprehensive system failures that seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver. The colony had transformed technological limitation into an art form of destruction. A communication satellite would launch a precision electromagnetic pulse. A mining laser would redirect gravitational fields. An agricultural drone would become a sensor platform that could predict and neutralize incoming attacks before they materialized. "They're not just defending," Sandra Kim observed, her voice tight with professional tension. "They're rewriting the entire concept of technological warfare." As the orbital battle space continued to transform, it became clear that New Horizon was teaching the Obsidian Syndicate a lesson they would never forget. Technology was no longer about superior hardware. It was about imagination. And in that battlefield, the humans were becoming true masters. The first cracks appeared in the Obsidian Syndicate's resolve long before the physical battle reached its breaking point. Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez was the first to vocalize the growing doubt. Huddled in a fortified dropship, his quantum-enhanced communication systems flickering with intermittent static, he turned to his squad leader with a look that betrayed something unprecedented, genuine uncertainty. "This isn't a normal conflict," he said, his voice low and tense. "We're not fighting an enemy. We're fighting an entire ecosystem of adaptation." Internal communication channels began to fragment. What had once been a unified mercenary force now showed signs of profound psychological strain. Each successive encounter with the colony's defenders chipped away at the Syndicate's legendary confidence. Commander Elena Rodriguez monitored the internal communications with growing concern. The neural feedback from her troops told a story more complex than any tactical display. Fear, confusion, a fundamental breakdown of everything they believed about warfare. In the colony's central command, Dr. Rachel Matthews watched the psychological deconstruction with scientific precision. "We're not just defending," she explained to her team. We're demonstrating the fundamental flaw in their entire approach to conflict. The mercenary troops found themselves experiencing something beyond traditional combat stress. Their most advanced neural interfaces, designed to provide real-time tactical information and maintain unit cohesion, became conduits of profound existential uncertainty. Lieutenant Sandra Kim's secondary assault team experienced the most dramatic breakdown. What began as a standard invasion protocol dissolved into a series of increasingly bizarre encounters. Weapon systems that should have been unstoppable became unreliable. Communication networks collapsed into cascading waves of misinformation and uncertainty. "They're using our technology against us," Marcus Chen reported, his voice a mixture of professional analysis and genuine concern. "Every defensive protocol we've developed is being systematically dismantled." The revolt began subtly. Small moments of hesitation. Tactical decisions that seemed to defy standard operating procedures. Mercenary units began to question not just their ability to win, but the very nature of their mission. Some veterans of the Obsidian Syndicate began to openly discuss retreat. Others argued for more aggressive tactics. The unified front that had conquered dozens of colonies was crumbling from within. Commander Rodriguez recognized the signs of impending psychological collapse. She had seen it before, but never at this scale. This wasn't just combat fatigue. This was a fundamental reimagining of warfare itself. "We're facing an enemy that doesn't understand the concept of defeat," she muttered, studying the tactical displays that seemed to shift and change with impossible complexity. The colony's defenders had transformed warfare from a physical conflict into a comprehensive psychological challenge. Every mercenary system, from neural interfaces to advanced weapon targeting, was being turned into a conduit of uncertainty. Lieutenant Ramirez gathered his squad during a momentary lull in the conflict. "This isn't about technology," he explained, his voice carrying a mixture of professional analysis and genuine respect. "This is about fundamentally different approaches to problem-solving." Some mercenary units began to experience what could only be described as a philosophical crisis. Their entire understanding of combat, of technological superiority, was being systematically dismantled by a colony that refused to play by any established rules. Dr. Matthews and her team watched the psychological deconstruction with a sense of calculated precision. "We're teaching them something fundamental about human potential," she explained to Michael Rodriguez, the colony's communication specialist. As the conflict progressed, it became clear that the real battle was happening inside the minds of the Obsidian Syndicate's troops. Their most advanced technological systems were becoming vulnerabilities rather than strengths. The mercenaries had come to conquer. Instead, they were being educated, and the lesson was far from over. The final stage of the conflict defied every known principle of warfare. Dr. Rachel Matthews stood in the colony's central operations hub, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe with collective intelligence. Around her, the entire settlement had transformed into a living, adaptive weapon system. "Full integration sequence initiated," announced Michael Rodriguez, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what was happening. Every piece of equipment on New Horizon became part of a comprehensive defense network. Agricultural drones networked with mining lasers, communication satellites synchronized with environmental monitoring systems. What looked like chaos was actually a perfectly orchestrated system of collective defense. Commander Elena Rodriguez of the Obsidian Syndicate watched in growing horror as her tactical displays showed something impossible. The colony wasn't just defending. It was evolving in real time. Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez led what remained of his mercenary squad through a landscape that seemed to actively resist their presence. Rock formations shifted. Communication signals twisted in impossible patterns. What should have been a straightforward battlefield had become a living ecosystem of resistance. "They're turning the entire planet into a weapon," Marcus Chen reported, his voice a mixture of professional analysis and genuine disbelief. The colony's approach to conflict transcended traditional military doctrine. Where other civilizations would establish fixed defensive positions, New Horizon created a fluid, adaptive battlefield that changed with every moment. A mining laser would fire, then immediately reconfigure. A communication node would redirect energy in ways that defied conventional understanding. Dr. Matthews explained the strategy to her core team. "We're not trying to win a battle," she said, pointing to a holographic display that showed the entire planetary defensive network. "We're demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to existence." Mercenary units found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't exist in any traditional sense. Defensive positions appeared and disappeared. Weapon systems were constantly reconfigured. The very terrain seemed to work against the invaders. "Quantum communication network at full capacity," Michael Rodriguez announced. Each colonist, each piece of equipment became a potential node of resistance. The defense was no longer about individual units, but about a collective intelligence that could adapt faster than any known technological system. Lieutenant Sandra Kim watched as her most advanced tactical systems became increasingly unreliable. Targeting networks collapsed. Communication channels twisted into impossible configurations. The mercenaries were fighting something that wasn't just a military force. It was a living, thinking ecosystem. The Obsidian Syndicate had come with the most advanced weapon systems in the known galaxy. The colonists were turning the entire concept of conflict on its head. Gravitational manipulation field activated. Came another announcement from the colony's command center. Entire sections of the battlefield could now be subtly reconfigured. Energy could be redirected. Perception could be manipulated. Commander Rodriguez realized they were facing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a defense. This was a comprehensive reimagining of warfare itself. The colonists had discovered something fundamental. In the right hands, limitation could be the greatest strength. Every piece of equipment, every individual became part of a comprehensive defensive network that could think, adapt, and evolve faster than any traditional military system. Mercenary units found themselves fighting an enemy that existed more in the realm of collective intelligence than physical space. Their most advanced technological systems were being systematically neutralized by an approach to conflict that was more biological than mechanical. As the conflict reached its peak, it became clear that New Horizon was teaching the Obsidian Syndicate a lesson they would never forget. Warfare was no longer about superior technology. It was about collective potential. And in that battlefield, the humans were becoming something entirely new. The silence was more powerful than any weapon. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her damaged flagship, the once proud Obsidian Syndicate vessel, now a testament to complete defeat. Around her, the surviving mercenary officers looked like shadows of their former selves. Professional warriors who had just witnessed something that fundamentally challenged everything they understood about conflict, technology, and human potential. Dr. Rachel Matthews and Michael Rodriguez approached the mercenary command shuttle, their approach calm and calculated. They weren't coming as conquerors. They were coming as educators. "You have two choices," Rachel began, her voice carrying the weight of the entire conflict. "Leave and spread the story of what you've witnessed, or remain and learn." Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez was the first to speak from the mercenary side. His quantum-enhanced neural interfaces still flickered with residual confusion. "We came to conquer," he said, his voice a mixture of professional pride and genuine humility. "Instead, we were taught a lesson." The colony of New Horizon had done more than just defend itself. It had demonstrated a fundamental reimagining of human potential. Every piece of equipment, every colonist had become part of a living, adaptive system that could think, evolve, and respond faster than any known technological network. Marcus Chen, the mercenary tactical specialist, compiled a preliminary report that would send shockwaves through the entire galactic mercenary community. It wasn't a battle report. It was a comprehensive analysis of a new approach to existence. They didn't just defend, Marcus explained to his commanders. They transformed the entire concept of conflict. The colony's approach had been revolutionary. Where traditional military forces saw equipment as tools, New Horizons saw them as living components of a comprehensive, adaptive system. Agricultural drones became sensors. Mining lasers became precision weapons. Communication networks became distributed intelligence platforms. Sandra Kim, another senior mercenary officer, observed the colony's infrastructure with a mixture of professional respect and genuine wonder. "This isn't a settlement," she said. "This is a living organism." Dr. Matthews explained their philosophy to the stunned mercenary leadership. "We don't see limitations as weaknesses," she said, pointing to various pieces of repurposed equipment. "We see them as opportunities for innovation." The Obsidian Syndicate had come with the most advanced weapon systems in the known galaxy. They left with something far more valuable, a fundamental understanding of human potential. "We're offering you a choice," Michael Rodriguez announced to the mercenary leadership. "Leave and share our story, or stay and learn." Some mercenary units chose to depart, carrying with them a story that would transform understanding across multiple star systems. Others chose to remain, becoming students of a fundamentally different approach to technology, conflict, and collective intelligence. Commander Rodriguez realized that this was more than a defeat. This was an education. The colony had demonstrated something profound. True strength wasn't about technological superiority. It was about collective potential, about seeing limitations not as barriers, but as opportunities for transformation. As the surviving mercenary ships prepared to depart, the colony of New Horizons stood as a testament to human innovation. They hadn't just defended themselves. They had rewritten the entire concept of conflict. The Obsidian Syndicate had come to conquer. Instead, they had been taught a lesson about the true nature of human potential. And the galaxy would never be the same.